Monica Carter had been looking forward to this night for weeks. As a top civil rights attorney, she spent most of her days fighting tough legal battles, standing up for people who had been treated unfairly. It was exhausting work, but she was passionate about justice. Still, even the strongest fighters needed a break, and tonight was supposed to be hers. She had just won a major case against police misconduct, one that had made headlines. It was a victory not just for her client, but for many others who had suffered in silence. The case had taken months of long hours, late nights, and intense courtroom arguments. Now that it was over, she wanted nothing more than to relax. She checked into an upscale hotel in the city, a place she had stayed before. It was quiet, comfortable, and known for its excellent service. As she entered her suite, she sighed in relief. The room was spacious, with soft lighting, a large bed covered in fresh white sheets, and a beautiful view of the city skyline. This was exactly what she needed, a night of peace, away from all the noise and stress. Monica took off her heels, stretched her tired feet, and ordered room service. She decided to treat herself, ordering a delicious meal with a glass of wine. As she waited, she turned on the TV and flipped through the channels, looking for something lighthearted to watch. It felt good to unwind. When her food arrived, she thanked the staff and sat down to enjoy her meal. For the first time in a long while, she felt at ease. She wasn't thinking about legal arguments or courtroom debates. She wasn't answering phone calls or responding to emails. It was just her, a good meal, and the quiet comfort of her hotel room. After dinner, she changed into comfortable pajamas and sat by the window, looking out at the glowing city lights. She thought about how far she had come, how many battles she had fought, and how many more were ahead. But for tonight, she pushed those thoughts away. She was determined to enjoy this rare moment of solitude. Little did she know, outside her door, a misunderstanding was about to unfold, one that would turn her peaceful night into something she never expected. The hotel staff had noticed her checking in alone. Instead of assuming she was a guest like anyone else, they had made a call. A suspicious person had been reported. And soon, a team of police officers would arrive, believing they were responding to something serious. Monica had no idea that while she was enjoying her quiet night, trouble was on its way. But what the people outside didn't know was that she wasn't just any woman. She was someone who knew the law inside and out, and she was not the type to back down. Monica was just about to settle into bed when a sudden loud knock echoed through her hotel room. It was unexpected and startled her for a moment. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her first thought was that maybe room service had come back by mistake, but something about the knock felt different, urgent, and forceful. She walked toward the door, hesitating for a second. Before she could even ask who it was, the knock came again, harder this time. Then, without warning, the door flew open, and several police officers rushed in. Monica stepped back, completely caught off guard. Her heart raced as she tried to understand what was happening. The officers moved quickly, their eyes scanning the room as if they were looking for something or someone. One of them pointed at her and demanded, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" His tone was sharp, not the kind of question meant for someone they thought belonged there. Monica frowned, trying to stay calm. "This is my room," she replied firmly. "I'm a guest at this hotel. What's going on?" The officers didn't answer her question. Instead, another one stepped forward. "We got a report of a suspicious person in this room," he said. "We need to see some ID." Monica's confusion turned to frustration. A suspicious person. In her own room. She had checked in properly, used her credit card, and had a key card issued in her name. What exactly made her suspicious? Still, she knew better than to argue right away. She had handled enough cases like this to understand how these situations could escalate. Taking a deep breath, she slowly walked over to her purse on the nightstand. "I'll show you my ID," she said, making sure to move carefully. She didn't want them to claim she was acting aggressively. As she reached for her wallet, one officer stepped closer, his hand resting on the holster of his belt. Move slowly, he warned, as if she were some kind of threat. Monica's grip on her wallet tightened. She turned back and looked at all of them, noticing how tense they were. It was clear that they didn't see her as just another hotel guest. They saw her as a problem. She handed over her ID, watching as one of the officers examined it. His eyes flickered with hesitation as he read her name. It was likely familiar to him. After all, Monica Carter had been in the news recently for exposing police misconduct. "You're a lawyer?" he asked, his voice losing some of its confidence. "Yes," she said, crossing her arms. "And I know my rights." A brief silence filled the room. The officers exchanged quick glances, realizing they had walked into something much bigger than they expected. But instead of admitting their mistake, they doubled down. "We're just doing our job," one of them said, trying to keep control of the situation. Monica gave him a sharp look. "Are you?" she asked. "Because it looks like you just stormed into the wrong room." At that moment, the situation took a turn. The officers weren't just dealing with any hotel guest. They were dealing with someone who knew exactly how to handle moments like this, and they weren't prepared for what would come next. Monica stood tall, her eyes locked on the officers as tension filled the room. The energy had shifted. She could see it in their faces, the hesitation, the uncertainty. They had stormed in expecting to deal with someone who would be too scared or too confused to question them. Instead, they had walked into the hotel room of a woman who knew the law better than they did. One of the officers, a man with short brown hair and a stiff posture, cleared his throat. "Look, we got a call. We're just following up," he said, trying to sound firm. But Monica could hear the slight change in his voice. It wasn't as commanding as before. "A call about what exactly?" she asked, folding her arms. The officer glanced at his partner, as if searching for the right words. "The hotel staff reported a suspicious person in this room," he finally said. Monica raised an eyebrow. "And what made me suspicious?" she pressed. "Was it because I walked in alone? Because I booked a nice room for myself? Or is it because I don't look like the usual guests you expect to see here?" No one answered. The officers shifted uncomfortably, their confident entrance now turning into an awkward standoff. Monica wasn't yelling. She wasn't making any sudden moves, but her words carried weight. "Let me get this straight," she continued. "Instead of calling the front desk to verify that I'm a paying guest, you decided to storm in here. You entered without a warrant, without permission, and without probable cause. And now that you realize your mistake, you're trying to act like this is just routine." One of the younger officers, who had been quiet up until now, finally spoke. "We weren't trying to cause trouble, ma'am. We just—" Monica held up a hand. "Stop right there," she said. "You've already caused trouble. Do you know what I do for a living?" She took a step closer, her voice steady but firm. "I'm a civil rights attorney. I spend every single day fighting cases just like this. And right now, you're giving me first-hand evidence of how these situations happen." The room went silent again. The officers now looked unsure of themselves. They had walked in expecting to control the situation. But instead, Monica had taken control without even raising her voice. One of them, the one who had been holding her ID, finally sighed and handed it back to her. "We didn't know who you were," he admitted. Monica took her ID and placed it back in her wallet. "That's the problem," she said. "You shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me with respect." The officers glanced at each other, clearly uncomfortable. This wasn't going the way they had planned. They were expecting compliance, maybe even fear. Instead, they were facing a woman who not only knew her rights but was fully prepared to hold them accountable. Now, they had a choice. Would they back down and admit their mistake? Or would they try to justify their actions and make things even worse? Monica had a feeling she already knew the answer, and she was ready for whatever came next. Monica could feel the tension growing thicker by the second. The officers had no idea how to respond to her calm but powerful presence. It was clear they weren't used to someone questioning their authority like this, especially in such a calm and collected manner. They had expected her to be intimidated or confused, something easy to dismiss. But Monica was neither. She could tell they were trying to figure out their next move. The silence was heavy, and she knew they were debating whether to continue the situation or back down. One officer, who had been quieter than the rest, looked at her and seemed to hesitate for a moment. Then he seemed to remember his role in all this and turned back to the others. "We should probably double-check with the hotel manager," he suggested, though it was clear he wasn't convinced. He was trying to justify their actions, but Monica wasn't interested in excuses anymore. "That's fine," Monica said, her voice still calm, but firm. "But while you're doing that, I'd like to know why this happened in the first place. Why didn't you try to verify anything before barging in?" She watched as the officers exchanged uncertain glances. They didn't have an answer that could satisfy her. They hadn't followed protocol. They hadn't done their due diligence. Instead, they had acted based on assumptions, and it was clear now that they were realizing just how badly they had messed up. After a few more uncomfortable moments, one officer stepped forward. "We'll call the manager." "Just give us a moment," he said, his tone finally softer than before. Monica nodded. "I'll be waiting." She didn't move from where she was standing, keeping her posture strong. There was no need to give them any room to think they could bully her into compliance. As one of the officers went to make the call, Monica took a breath, trying to stay patient. Her mind was racing, but she focused on staying calm. She had seen situations like this before. Police officers stepping over boundaries, using their power to intimidate people who were too afraid or uninformed to stand up for themselves. Monica was neither afraid nor uninformed. She was someone who knew exactly how to handle herself in moments like this. The officer returned a few minutes later, his face a little less sure than before. "The manager's on his way up," he said, his voice quieter than it had been. Monica didn't waste any time. She took a step closer to him, maintaining eye contact. "I want to make one thing clear," she said. "You need to understand that people like me, people who work in civil rights, don't just let things like this slide. I'll make sure there's a record of what happened here tonight, and I'll make sure someone is held accountable. This is not how things are supposed to work." The officer nodded, his expression unreadable. Monica could tell he was trying to maintain his authority, but it was slipping away. She wasn't making threats. She was simply stating the truth. Within minutes, the hotel manager arrived, looking flustered. He recognized Monica immediately and rushed over to her. "Miss Carter, I am so sorry for the misunderstanding," he said, his voice full of apology. Monica glanced at him, still standing tall. "You'll be hearing from me about this," she said, making it clear that this was far from over. The officers, once so sure of themselves, now looked like they were trying to shrink away from the spotlight Monica had just shone on them. They had made a huge mistake, and they knew it. But Monica wasn't going to let them off the hook so easily. She was a fighter, and this was just the beginning. The hotel manager, Mr. Peterson, looked genuinely embarrassed as he stood there, glancing nervously between Monica and the officers. He had clearly recognized Monica from the news and understood the gravity of the situation. The last thing he wanted was to make this worse, but his face was flushed with anxiety as he tried to explain. I don't know what happened, Miss Carter," he stammered. "There must have been some sort of mistake. I'm terribly sorry. I'll make sure this is resolved right away." Monica didn't respond immediately. She let the manager talk, giving him a moment to collect his thoughts. His apology wasn't enough to undo the disruption that had already been caused, and she wasn't about to let this slide. She knew that the hotel staff should have followed proper procedures to verify who she was before involving the police. "Mr. Peterson," Monica said calmly but firmly, "this mistake should have never happened. I checked in like any other guest, paid for the room, and was simply minding my own business. This is not just an inconvenience. It's an example of something much bigger, something that happens all too often. People being judged based on assumptions, not facts." The manager nodded in agreement, his hands slightly trembling as he tried to maintain his composure. Yes, of course. I see that now. I will personally handle the situation and make sure that something like this never happens again. You have my word. But Monica wasn't done yet. She wasn't going to let him off with a simple apology. This wasn't just about the hotel's mistake. It was about accountability. It was about making sure that no one else ever had to go through what she had just experienced. I expect more than just an apology, Mr. Peterson, she said, her voice calm but insistent. I expect you to take immediate action. I want to know exactly what you plan to do to ensure this doesn't happen again, not just to me, but to anyone else in the future. The manager looked even more flustered, but he nodded again. Absolutely, Ms. Carter. I'll review the hotel's policies, and I'll make sure all staff members are retrained. We'll have a full internal review. Monica glanced over at the officers, who were standing awkwardly in the background, looking like they weren't sure whether they should say something or simply leave. The officer who had initially spoken to her earlier now seemed embarrassed, his posture much less rigid than before. It was clear they knew they had made a mistake, but they didn't know how to undo it. Monica turned back to the manager. "And I'll need you to follow up with me in writing," she said. "I want to see the steps you're taking. And if this issue isn't addressed thoroughly, I'll take legal action against the hotel. You're not getting off easy." Her words were not meant to threaten. Monica simply wanted to make sure they understood the seriousness of the situation. She wasn't just some random person they could dismiss. She had the knowledge and the resources to make sure her voice was heard. Mr. Peterson nodded vigorously. "Of course, Ms. Carter. You'll have all the information you need. I promise this will be taken seriously." Monica didn't let her guard down. "Good. I'll be expecting to hear from you soon," she said, turning her attention back to the officers. The officers, clearly uncomfortable, shifted on their feet as the manager continued to apologize. Monica knew the encounter wasn't over yet, but at least she had made her point clear. The hotel was going to have to deal with the consequences of their actions, and the police officers, well, they were going to learn a valuable lesson too, not to assume someone was guilty based on nothing but their own biases. As she stood there, looking at the officers who had come into her room without reason, Monica realized something. This was more than just a personal injustice. It was another reminder of how important her work was. She was a lawyer, yes, but more importantly, she was a voice for those who didn't always have the chance to speak up. Tonight, she had used her voice to fight back, and she wasn't going to stop anytime soon. After the officers left the room, their heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway, Monica felt a sense of calm, but it was quickly replaced by a quiet determination. She knew this wasn't over. It was only just beginning. While the hotel manager was busy assuring her that everything would be taken care of, Monica had already begun thinking about the next steps. She needed to make sure that not only would the hotel address its mistakes, but the police department would as well. The first thing she did was pull out her phone and make a call. She knew just who to reach out to: a close friend, James Reynolds, who worked as the lead investigator for her law firm. James had been with her through many high-profile cases and knew exactly what needed to be done when things like this happened. As the phone rang, Monica leaned against the desk in her hotel room, still processing the events of the evening. It wasn't just about the raid. It was about everything behind it. The assumptions, the bias, the way she had been treated simply because of her appearance. It wasn't new to her. She'd been through this before, seen it happen to others countless times. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, she was going to make sure things didn't get swept under the rug. "James," she said as soon as he picked up, "I need you to do me a favor." "Anything, Monica," James replied, his voice already familiar with the seriousness in hers. "I just had a run-in with a few officers. They barged into my hotel room. No warrant, no reason. They claimed they were responding to a report of a suspicious person, and then they started questioning me like I was some kind of criminal. I need you to start digging into this. Find out who made the report, who authorized this raid, and what their protocol is for situations like this. There was a pause on the other end of the line, but Monica could already sense that James was shifting into action. He didn't need any more details. He knew exactly how to proceed. "I'll get on it right away," James said. "I'll start with the police department. I'll look up the officers involved and see if there have been any prior complaints. I'll also reach out to the hotel to make sure we get a copy of their security footage. We'll get to the bottom of this." "Good," Monica replied. "I want to make sure they know exactly who they're dealing with. I don't plan on letting them off the hook." Monica hung up the phone and exhaled slowly. She knew that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't just about holding the officers accountable. It was about ensuring that this never happened again to anyone, anywhere. She would use every resource at her disposal to make sure that the people responsible faced consequences. While she waited for James to get back to her, Monica sat down at a small desk in the corner of the room and began typing out an email. She addressed it to her firm's legal team and outlined the incident in detail. She made sure to note every part of the officers' actions, their unlawful entry, the way they treated her, and how they had acted without verifying any information. She was thorough and precise, ensuring there was a clear record of the events. After sending the email, Monica leaned back in the chair and rubbed her eyes. It had been a long day, but she wasn't going to rest until the truth came to light. She wasn't going to let anyone forget what had happened tonight. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Monica stood up and walked over, her instincts telling her it was the hotel manager again. She opened the door to find him standing there, holding a small envelope. "Ms. Carter," he said, his face still anxious, "I've spoken to the hotel's legal department. We've reviewed everything, and we're prepared to offer you compensation for this inconvenience. We'll also be taking immediate action to ensure something like this never happens again." Monica glanced at the envelope in his hand, but didn't take it just yet. She wasn't interested in a quick fix or a simple apology. "I'll need a full report on the actions you're taking," she said, her voice unwavering. "I want everything in writing, and I want to know exactly what changes will be made to prevent this from happening to anyone else. I won't accept anything less." The manager seemed to hesitate, but he nodded. "Of course, Miss Carter. I'll make sure you get everything you need." Monica took the envelope, but she knew this was just the beginning. She still had a lot of work to do, and now she had a personal stake in making sure the system didn't fail her or anyone else who found themselves in a similar situation. As she sat back down, the phone rang again. This time, it was James. "I've got the information," he said quickly. "I'll send you everything shortly." And Monica, "We've got more than enough to make a case here." The next few days were a whirlwind for Monica. She spent hours on the phone with James, going through the details of the investigation. He had pulled records on the officers involved, checked for any past complaints or patterns of misconduct, and even uncovered something startling. One of the officers involved in the hotel raid had been previously named in several complaints of racial profiling. It wasn't just an isolated incident. This wasn't the first time he had made unjust decisions based on assumptions. When James brought this to her attention, Monica felt a surge of anger, but it was mixed with a sense of determination. She had always known that cases like this were part of a much larger pattern, but seeing it laid out in front of her only solidified her resolve. It wasn't just about the wrong done to her. It was about addressing the system that allowed these injustices to continue. In the meantime, the hotel had been true to their word. Mr. Peterson had been diligent in sending her detailed updates on the actions they were taking. He had implemented a training program for the hotel staff, focusing on ensuring that employees followed proper procedures when dealing with guests and emergency situations. They had also begun reviewing their security protocols to prevent any future incidents like this. But Monica wasn't satisfied. The steps the hotel was taking were good, but they weren't enough. She needed to make sure that the change wasn't just superficial. She needed to ensure that their words matched their actions, and she wasn't going to stop until they did. The police department, on the other hand, was a different story. They had been less cooperative. Despite James' best efforts to get more information from internal sources, the department was dragging its feet. They had issued a brief statement apologizing for the incident, but it felt more like a formality than a genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Monica wasn't about to let that be the end of it. She knew it was time to take the next step. Monica sat down at her desk one evening after a long day of legal research and began drafting a press release. This wasn't just about holding the officers accountable. It was about making sure that the public knew what had happened. She knew that the more people understood, the harder it would be for anyone to ignore the issue. She wasn't just representing herself anymore. She was representing all those who had been wrongly treated, all those whose voices had been silenced. As she typed, she felt a sense of power in her words. She described the incident clearly, detailing the unlawful entry into her hotel room, the officers' refusal to provide valid explanations, and their assumption that she was guilty without any reason to believe so. She also made sure to include the officers' history of racial profiling, showing that this wasn't an isolated event, but part of a broader systemic issue. She carefully reviewed the statement before sending it to her media contacts. Monica knew that once it was out there would be no going back. The story would be out in the open, and the police would no longer be able to sweep it under the rug. The response was immediate. News outlets picked up the story, and soon, Monica was getting calls from reporters, asking for interviews and more information. The story was everywhere. People were furious. And for the first time in a long time, Monica felt like her efforts were truly making a difference. With the media now involved, things began to move faster. The police department couldn't afford to ignore the pressure. They had to act. Monica knew that the next steps would be crucial. She had already made it clear that she wasn't going to back down, and the officers involved were starting to feel the weight of the public scrutiny. But she wasn't finished yet. This was just one battle in a much larger war. She knew that this wasn't the end of her journey. There would be legal battles, meetings, and press conferences to navigate, but Monica was ready. She was no stranger to the fight. In fact, it was exactly where she thrived. And this time, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for change. She was fighting for a world where no one else would have to face the same unjust treatment. As the weeks went by, Monica's determination only grew stronger. The media coverage of the hotel incident continued to generate attention, and public outrage seemed to grow by the day. The pressure on the police department was mounting, but Monica knew that the real change wouldn't come just from media exposure. She had started this fight with a clear mission: to ensure accountability, but more importantly, to make sure that the systems that allowed this injustice to happen were addressed. She began working with a team of civil rights advocates, lawyers and activists to make sure that this case didn't fade into the background like so many others before it. They started gathering data, compiling stories from other people who had experienced similar mistreatment. It quickly became clear that what had happened to Monica wasn't just an isolated incident. There was a pattern of unfair treatment, and it needed to be exposed. Monica met with community leaders, local politicians, and anyone who could help amplify her cause. The support was overwhelming. People from all walks of life were reaching out to her, sharing their own stories of police overreach and racial profiling. For Monica, it was humbling and motivating all at once. She knew she wasn't just standing up for herself anymore. She was standing up for all of them. Through her efforts, a coalition was formed, one that aimed to address police accountability and racial profiling head-on. They began drafting proposals for new policies, ones that would require more transparency in police actions and stronger safeguards against bias. Monica used her legal expertise to help guide the proposals, and she worked tirelessly to ensure that they would be implemented, not just discussed. She wasn't going to let the momentum slip away. One afternoon, as Monica sat in her office reviewing the coalition's proposals, she received a call from James. The police department had finally agreed to meet. It had taken weeks of pressure, but they had agreed to come to the table. Monica arrived at the meeting with a sense of quiet confidence. She had prepared for this moment for weeks. She had her case files, the data, the testimonies, all the tools she needed to demand change. When she entered the room, she was met with the same officers who had once barged into her hotel room. This time, however, they didn't carry the same arrogance. The look on their faces said it all. They knew the stakes had changed. The meeting was intense. Monica and her team presented their findings, detailing the systemic issues that allowed the events in the hotel room to occur. She made it clear that this wasn't just about her personal experience. It was about the need for lasting reform. The police officers, who had initially been defensive, were now listening. Monica's unwavering commitment to justice had started to break through their walls. By the end of the meeting, the department had agreed to several key reforms. They promised to review their training programs, implement more stringent procedures for interactions with the public, and provide greater accountability measures. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a significant step forward. As Monica left the meeting, she felt a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't over yet, but this was the beginning of real change. She had fought for what was right, and her work had already begun to make a difference. There were still many battles to fight, many injustices to uncover, but Monica was ready for them. She had proven, once again, that when people come together and stand firm in the face of adversity, real change is possible. That evening, as she sat in her office reflecting on everything that had transpired, Monica knew that her journey wasn't just about legal victories. It was about creating a world where everyone, no matter their race or background, could feel safe and respected. And though her work was far from finished, she was more determined than ever to continue the fight for justice, equality, and the truth.